See a few of my haters here, actually.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's so funny.
Sure. I'm incapable of that, so I need to make me look good.
Oh, a pink shirt, man.
Yeah, I know. I wore my overalls, so.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Norman Citizens for Racial Justice Candidate Forum. We're really grateful that everybody chose to be here this evening, especially in light of recent events in our community. Racial justice is something that we definitely need to center and prioritize, even here in Norman. Becoming an inclusive community involves everybody, and so that's something that we're striving to do. Here are some of the people that form Norman Citizens for Racial Justice. We are a loose-knit grassroots collective that was formed in October 2017 when Councilwoman Bria Clark pushed forward an initiative to change DeBar Street, which, as many know, was named after a former leader of the KKK in Oklahoma. So, of course, here in an inclusive community that prioritizes racial justice, we know that having streets named after KKK members is unacceptable, and so that was our first initiative. But of course, we've been working together long before that, Stop the Plains All-American Pipeline, Ready for 100 initiatives. We really find ourselves all over. We formed this group to become a grassroots intersectional alliance of advocates working to dismantle white supremacy, uplift and defend the marginalized in our community, and achieve social, economic, and political justice for all peoples in the city of Norman and the state of Oklahoma. Since DeBar Street, which was successfully changed last year or the year before, we've also involved ourselves with the Norman Police Department, with the Cleveland County Sheriff's Department, and with Norman Regional Hospital following the unjust death of Marconia Kessie, who was a homeless Black man who died last year, actually a year ago last week. So we've been working on a lot of different issues. We've pushed for a citizens advisory board that would make sure that citizens have some sort of oversight or work dealings with the police department and with our sheriff's department. And we're really excited about these initiatives to make sure that we are prioritizing all the voices in our community and really working together. My name is Ashley Nicole McCrae. I am one of the co-founders, and I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to our other co-founder, Dion Osborne. Thank you.
So I'm actually technically not a current Norman resident. I'm actually living in Tulsa, but I might be back. So I consider myself a dual resident right now. But I wanted to come and show support. Before I list off kind of the pledge that we were hoping that all candidates will support, I just want to say that tonight you might hear responses you don't like, you do like. We would just ask that you be respectful of all the candidates and to hold your opinions until after the forum. Thank you. So, because historical and contemporary racism is a problem that intersects through so many aspects of our society, we believe the solutions must also be intersectional in their approach. So, one, environmental racism, classism, defined as the placement of low-income tribal and minority communities in the proximity of environmentally hazardous or degraded environments, such as toxic waste, pollution, and urban decay. Environmental racism and classism are deeply present in the city of Norman. As a candidate for elected office in Norman, I pledge to protect minority and low-income communities from harmful waste and pollution, support the expansion and aggressive investment in a goal for 100% renewable energy, support access to a third-party or municipal-owned utility through working with citizens in cities to lift the respective state ban and moratorium on these entities. Provide resources for low-income, tribal, and minority communities to adopt cleaner, healthier, and more energy-efficient infrastructure. Support the expansion of access to clean public transportation through a citywide bike-sharing program and an expanded bus route on biofuels. Support a ban on any new installments of pipeline and fracking wells in the city of Norman and on absentee Shawnee tribal land. And then to support an equitable stormwater utility that makes businesses and wealthier landowners pay their fair share. Number two, generational poverty, economic inequality. Due to a history of racist governmental policies, institutions, and practices, such as forced removal of indigenous peoples, land theft, known as Boomer-Sooner land runs, slavery, Jim Crow laws, the Federal Housing Administration refusing mortgages for minorities, and sundown town ordinances, minorities have been unable to store and pass down wealth to future generations, leading to African Americans, for instance, having a median net worth of $11,000 compared to a median net worth of $141,900 for white Americans. And that's from the Labor Institute, Les Leopold's book, Runaway Inequality. Therefore, as a candidate for elected office, I pledge to work with citizens in other cities to remove the state barrier for cities to raise the minimum wage, offer the community financial literacy workshops or trainings, actively recruit and invest in women, rural, and minority-owned small businesses through financial and/or educational resources, such as the city partnering with OU's Innovation Hub. Number 3, institutional racism, racial indifference, color blindness. I'm going to read a quote from Dr. King. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. That was from Letter from Birmingham Jail, 1963. As a candidate for elected office, I pledge to work with the NPS school board to integrate local minority and tribal history, no matter how visceral or negative, into mainstream Norman Public School education curriculum. Restore subpoena power to the Norman Human Rights Commission so that it may investigate hiring practices, rental leasing practices, bank loans, and mortgages to determine racial or class bias. Establish new and renovate existing public displays/memorials that honor the sacrifices and contributions of Norman's tribal and ethnic minority residents. Urgently support the creation of a new senior center and allow the old senior center to be used as a people's history museum. Assist in the facilitation of town halls and community workshops focused on cultural competence education led by underrepresented voices. Require cultural competency training for all city officials, staff, police officers, firefighters, and city employees. Organize annual public celebrations of minority holidays, such as, but not limited to, Indigenous Peoples Day, MLK Day, and offer other minority groups to petition for new holidays that recognize the rich cultures of all people in Norman. Number 4, mental health. Mental health affects families, individuals, and homeless persons from all backgrounds. As a candidate for elected office in Norman, I pledge to work with the Norman Regional Hospital to eliminate discriminatory practices towards minority, LGBTQIA, mentally ill, or uninsured patients. Support efforts for homeless persons and low-income families to receive basic mental health resources. Number 5, criminal justice reform. Oklahoma's overcrowded prison system reached a record 63,009 inmates at the end of August, prompting State Corrections Director Joe Alball to issue a dire warning. This was August of 2018. I am concerned, very concerned. We need to do something before something serious happens. The state will end up paying a price, and I'm hoping that price of delaying criminal justice reform does not come in the way of costing individuals their lives. That was from the Oklahoman. Oklahoma's prison population has reached record levels, and Oklahoma leads the nation and thus the world in incarceration of women and African Americans. As a candidate for elected office in Norman, I pledge to provide special prosecution for officer-involved fatalities of citizens in Norman, support the decriminalization of simple possession of marijuana under an ounce by eliminating fines, pursue and expand on community policing rather than militarization. So no to the Bearcat. Number 6, political representation. The current city council is limited to a stipend totaling no more than $100 per month, $1,200 per year, according to Article 2, Section 1 of the City of Norman Charter. We believe this creates a barrier to entry for low-income, rural, and tribal representation on Norman City Council. And whereas Norman is the 3rd most populated city in Oklahoma, after number 1, Oklahoma City, with an annual city council salary of $12,000, and number 2, Tulsa, with an annual city council salary of $24,000, we believe that as a candidate for elected office in Norman, you should pledge to support the amendment of the Norman Charter through an ordinance, ballot vote, or by other means to substantially increase the monthly annual salary of Norman City Council members, and to draw on the rich experiences and resources from diverse groups and individuals in the community to create unity and reconciliation that brings us closer and moves us forward as a more progressive city. And finally, acknowledge the tribal sovereignty of the absentee Shawnee tribe and participate in an ongoing government-to-government relationship between the city of Norman and the absentee Shawnee people and political representation. And that is our pledge.
So we are asking all of the candidates present to sign the pledge that we just read to you. We will be posting on our Facebook page who decided and who declined to sign our pledge. And we are now asking if our mayoral candidates could please join us up here. Do we want to make statements first? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and let the ward candidates make statements if you do sign the pledge. So if you are willing to sign the pledge, we are inviting you up here to make a statement that will be broadcast and that we will also share. So thank you. Go ahead.
Should we hand the pledges out? Yeah.
So, hi, I apologize for the confusion. So at this time, we would like to invite those running for office in the wards to take this pledge and make a statement. And then after we are done with that, we will do the forum section for the mayoral candidates. Yes. Also, for the mayoral candidate forum, we have some questions prepared, but we will take some questions from the audience at the end. Jeff will be collecting the questions, so if you would like to write one down, he will be collecting them throughout. So, would any of the candidates running in the wards, I think I saw Sean stand up first, so we'll bring Sean up here now. 2 minutes for the statement, and if you would like to make the pledge.
Do we sign later?
Sorry.
I'll get with you. You don't have to worry about it.
Go ahead and make the statement.
All right. Hi, I'm Sean Williamson Jennings, and I would love to be Ward 1's next city council member. So, my goal, one of the things they asked us is, what's our goal for Norman? And my goal is that we live out our motto, which is being an inclusive city. We certainly know that this week has been a difficult week, to just say the least. I know that throughout this week, it was one of those things in which, I thought for this community that racism, like air, is polluting us. And that we must in this city do something to address the pollution of racism and bigotry in this city. Because this is not just a University of Oklahoma issue. Because if that was the case, we would wonder, why are the bigots coming to Norman? We know that our destinies are inextricably connected. So if OU has a problem, the city of Norman has a problem, and we must address it. And so I think there are a few things that we should do to address it. I will always say people first. We take care of people in this city. It is incredibly important that we address trauma. So I love that this pledge talked about trauma, that which is intergenerational and that which is suffered in our own homes. We must, as a city, prioritize trauma. We must recruit diverse workforce members at all levels. And I know I'm running for public office and I'm the only Black person who's running. But I do believe that we must also elect people who reflect the citizens that we have here in Norman. That's important. That we also have policies that monitor and assess the social impact that it's having on the city of Norman. So how does this impact those who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender? How does this affect those who are people of color? How does this policy affect people? That's what's important for us to address today. And then finally, as I end, we have to evaluate. We must go back to monitoring and evaluating the policies that we put forward. And so I ask for us to do three things, which is make sure people are first, make sure that our policies are not adversely affecting the people in this community, and that we take a stand in monitoring the progress that we're making as a city. Thank you. My name's Sean Williamson Jennings, and I'd love to have your vote on February.
Thank you very much. Okay, Kate? And we have a copy of the pledge for you to sign here as well. Yes.
So I'm Kate Bierman. I'm your current Ward 1 council member, and I'm running for re-election. And in terms of the particular issues that we're facing in this community, I think it's really important that the individuals who sit behind this dais utilize that platform and that opportunity to provide voices for those communities that don't have a voice on that dais, to provide room for it. It's not my job to tell you what's important and what needs to change. It's my job to step back and listen to what's important and what needs to change. And that was something that was a strong lesson learned during the DeBar Street renaming, was that it wasn't about us sitting back there. It was about the people sitting in this room telling us that there was a problem that needed to be addressed. And it's also really important that the people who sit back here utilize the tools of government that, as Dion said, had been used to oppress people in the past, to utilize those tools to rectify those situations. And so everything from eliminating the fines for marijuana possession, we took the first step by decriminalizing, and the fines are still way too high. We need to address that. Those are the kinds of things that we can do up here to recognize that the policies we put in place can still have a disproportionate impact even though we're making change. So I am happy to sign this pledge tonight, and I'm happy to start tomorrow to work through it, because it's my job to take this and to listen to it. It's not my job to tell you how to fix these problems. It's my job to listen and to amplify your voices to allow you to tell us how to fix these problems. Thank you.
Other candidates running for
Hello, my name is Allison Petrone, and I'm running for Ward 3 City Council. And I would first like to say thank you so much for having this important forum. It was really great to see you, Dion. This was couched on the Facebook page as questions that we are not likely to hear in the rest of the forums, and that's unfortunate that these topics aren't front and center, especially when they are definitely front and center on our newspapers every day. So I just want to say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, at least to listen from the mayoral candidates, and the opportunity to say hello and introduce myself to you. I'm just going to quickly go over what I know of I want to take the pledge, obviously. The environmental issues that you mentioned, this is going off memory, and I have a bit of ADHD, so I'm doing my best here on taking the notes. But environmental racism, this is definitely something that we have had a really difficult time with in Oklahoma. And quite frankly, it's, especially with some fracking operations, has been completely ignored. And actually, I would say it's actually been flagrant, not completely ignored. And we need to deal with that. So we need to have... on the stormwater utility, I have concerns on that as well. That, for one, it doesn't, you can call something an environmental plan, but it doesn't make it an environmental plan, much like I'm going to compare it to fracking when we put setbacks in or we require extra burn off, that doesn't make it an environmental plan. That just makes it less obvious what's happening. So we need to take a look at how we market certain concepts in Norman, that we're being honest with people. Meaning there's a cap on what it costs on.
Is this on right now? Hi. Yes, just sign at the bottom. So we really want to thank Allison and Sean and Kate for taking this important pledge. And yes, we have one more. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Ahern. I'm also running for Ward 3. And I think what we're seeing throughout Norman's history is a parade of privilege. We have seen white person after white person after white person sit on this council. And we need that to change. I personally can't do that by being elected. But as a member of the council, I pledge to work to include all of Norman's community, to address these issues, to address the fact that there isn't a required course at OU teaching issues about race and ethnicity, to address the fact that we have to have forums like this to have these conversations in the first place. I think that as members of the council, we have a responsibility and an obligation to listen, to act, and then to learn. We will make mistakes. It won't be easy, but we'll get there by including Norman's community, all of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kimberly Blodgett, running for City Council Ward 7. And again, thank you very much for letting us get up here and speak on this important topic. So I kind of prepared a speech, so I hope that's okay. Over my lifetime as a woman and a mother, my experience have influenced my beliefs. I grew up here in Norman in a working class community. My family never had much money, but my father taught us the value of hard work and dedication. My mother taught me how to be a strong woman in a world dominated by men. It was those values from my parents that emboldened me to pursue my college degree, one of the first in my family to do so. And I did it as a working mom. It was not easy, but I wanted to secure mine and my children's future. I have 5 children, 2 of which we recently adopted, one of which is living with disabilities. My experience as a single mom pursuing an education taught me that we can do anything, but we have to be given the opportunity. So many of us aren't given the chance and are left behind. When I, as a teacher, tell my little boys and my little girls that they can be whatever they want to be, we have to mean it. We must offer everyone a seat at the table to ensure every voice is heard in the decisions we make. It was inspiring to see so many women and people of color run for office this election cycle, just 100 years since women were guaranteed the right to vote. It is my belief that we need more women at the table. We need more people of color at the table, and we need more members of the LGBTQ community at the table. We need more people with disabilities at the table, because for too long, these communities have been left out and excluded when decisions were made for them, not by them. In a climate like we are,
Hello, everyone. I'm not feeling too great this evening, so I apologize if I'm a little shaky here. My name is Stephen Tyler Holman. I'm the Ward 7 City Council member. I was first elected in 2013. I'm running for a 4th term on this City Council. I am from Norman. I grew up here. I went to Kennedy Elementary School, which is many people know as the lowest income elementary school in the city of Norman. I went to Irving Middle School, which also is considered to be very low income. It's extremely diverse as well compared to the other schools in Norman. I graduated from Norman High in 2004. And I grew up on the east side of Norman. I was raised by a single dad, and I'm an only child. So I've spent most of my life being a renter, living in mostly 2-bedroom apartments. I haven't had a whole lot in my lifetime. And one of my reasons that I wanted to run for city council is because I've always cared greatly about this community. I've always understood the history of Norman, including the history that isn't so great, that isn't so fun to talk about for many people, and understanding that we've had issues and problems in our past, and wanting to do everything that I can to try to change those and make it better. Our motto being building an inclusive community, because we always have work to do. We can always do better. And one of the reasons that I'm running for city council is to continue that. I have a record of holding accountability to the police, for example, for advocating for justice. My biggest political issue outside of city council, but it is a part of city council, is the criminal justice system, and specifically the issue of incarceration. Innocent people being incarcerated is a very big deal to me. And that's what I'm passionate about. I believe in you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay. I just want to thank everybody again for coming tonight. This is the first time we've done a forum, and you know we are always learning. But I think that everyone in this room agrees that these issues are very important, and we appreciate you giving your time and attention to them. Thank you, Sean and Kate. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Kimberly. And thank you, Stephen, for taking this pledge. And with that, we are going to transition to the mayoral forum. Thank you.
Is it going to automatically shut off, or am I going to need to look to you for timing, like how much time we have? Too conspicuous.
Probably so.
Do you like sitting up here?
No.
Is it your first time to sit up here?
It is.
You are. Okay. How soon do you want to start? Well, I guess this mic is hot, so when I say how soon do we want to start, maybe we want to get started right away. On behalf of Norman Citizens for Racial Justice, as well as on behalf of myself personally, Amy Bradshaw, I appreciate each of you, Bill, Bria, and Evan, making time to be here, and none of you hesitated. As soon as we asked, you were here. So thank you very much for joining us.
I just wanted to let y'all know we'll be doing We'll be doing 2-minute responses to the questions. I can give you a 1 minute and then a 30-second time signal.
Well, if she times it, it'll
And we are allowing limited redirects?
night. City
Clarification, or are we just moving on?
Limited. Yes.
Okay, so we're not going to assume that there will be redirects or follow-ups on every question, but there may be, so depending on how each question goes. What I'll be doing is giving a little bit of a preamble for every question and then asking the question. Do we want to just, is it okay with you if we start with Evan and then on the second question move to Bria to start first, and on the third question move to Bill to start first, and we'll just rotate around?
Sure, that works.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? There are 7 questions.
7, okay.
Yeah.
I was hoping you were going to say there's 50 or 100.
We can come up with that many more.
I imagine the audience does too.
Okay, so we have 7 questions. I'll tell you the specific subtopic, give you a preamble, and then there will be a series of 1 to 3 questions related to the topic for each. So the first topic is inclusive community, building an inclusive community. The mission of the City of Norman is building an inclusive community. It is imperative that our city's mayor and other political leaders understand that tokenism of a handful of marginalized individuals is not an effective substitute for policies that will advance this mission. Building an inclusive community requires a deep commitment to understanding why our community is often not inclusive and the ways in which it is not, followed by policies that address inequality. Here's the question. As mayor, what steps will you take to ensure that the interests of marginalized people in Norman are not only considered, but that their needs and perspectives are accurately and inclusively represented when making major decisions for the City of Norman's health, safety, and future?
Okay. Wow. First, let me say thank you for hosting this and putting this on. My name is Evan A. Dunn. I'm running for mayor to be on the ballot and to be in a position where I can amplify the audience to which my ideas, I think, have resonance. The question is, as mayor, what steps will I take? You know, the mayor is not omnipotent. The mayor is not an emperor. The mayor is not anything more than just one of the 9 members on council. But they are a figurehead. They do have a title that's powerful. Understanding the anthropological DNA history that binds all human beings together ought to be a fundamental aspect of our educational experience. If we have students or people in our community who have not read a people's history of the United States or do not know the dynamic interactions within the human mind, any attempt to implement policies that constrain people who are themselves working through trauma and the experiences that they've been exposed to is going to be incomplete. So maybe I really aspire to preempt a lot of these problems, and I'm sorry if that's not going to be a good enough answer for you, but these issues are just too complex, and to connectively communicate about those dynamics, I think, does enhance everyone, and it makes them want to become a more integral part of this inclusive community.
Thank you.
Timed.
And if she has to stand up and come get you.
Oh.
Okay,
Trying to
Bria.
keep it under control. Something like that, though. It's
Thank you.
a big deal.
So as mayor, I think that the leader and the face of our community needs to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. I have done that in the last 3 years in our community, and I will continue to do so. Now, to make informed decisions that consider and represent the inclusive and diverse people we have in our community, you can't just make a Facebook post about it and say, give me your input. You have to go to where they are. But even then, that's not enough. These people need to know that you are genuinely interested in what they have to say. And you have to listen and you have to respond, because everyone knows tokenism. Everyone knows checking in at a certain place to check that box. And so it's more than just being there, it's building relationships. I am a representative that has opened a door for people who feel marginalized to come speak to me and share their concerns with me. And I know that as a fact because it happens often. And I will continue that as mayor. We have led real change in the city of Norman in the past 3 years, and we have been a role model, frankly, for what Oklahoma needs to be. And as mayor, I will continue to do that. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for this opportunity to be here. Appreciate the Norman Citizens for Racial Justice for holding this forum. This is a very, very important topic, and these are very important issues for our community, and we need to have these conversations. If I'm honored enough to be elected to be your mayor, I absolutely agree that social justice and racial issues need to be at the forefront and something that the mayor stands up for and ensures that our policies are fair and equal to everybody. I have fought for environmental policies that are fair to everybody in our community and to ensure that we are protecting our lands from any further harm. But beyond that, I think the number one thing we have to do as mayors to build public trust. That means going into these marginalized communities, talking to them at where they're at, and recognizing and acknowledging the white privilege that oftentimes stands in our institutions, such as the city of Norman, and ensure that we are breaking down those barriers so that we're bringing people together in an honest and transparent form of conversation. And one of the ways that I will do that is, if I'm elected to be mayor, I will form a mayor's racial and social justice roundtable, including representatives from all of the marginalized communities, so they can talk to the mayor directly, firsthand, to ensure that we are building policies that ensure that we have an inclusive community for everyone.
Thank you. We're going to go on to question 2. The topic for this one is acknowledging and honoring our history. In the 2017 campaign to change the name of then DeBar Avenue, we were reminded of the racist history of the land we live on. Edwin DeBar's power and influence in the city of Norman and the state of Oklahoma, as both a professor and dean at the University of Oklahoma and the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in Oklahoma, cannot be overstated. We were reminded that developments of city and state institutions were influenced by the settler colonialism and KKK. We were reminded that Norman itself was a sundown town. During the effort to change the name, many people of color bravely recounted their own experiences and the experiences of their families on this land. We also were reminded of the historic work done in this town by many people, such as George and Barbara Henderson, who, as the first black homeowners in Norman, established the Norman Human Rights Council and opened possibilities for generations to come in the town they made their home. Understanding how our town formed, remembering the racist history of our home, and acknowledging the selective and unequal harms of both past and present is absolutely vital if we are sincere about our mission of building an inclusive community. And we must honor those who have been dedicated to working and sacrificing to build a more inclusive community for everyone. In 2015, Norman residents voted to approve Norman Forward, and many Norman Forward quality of life projects have been completed or are now underway. Yet building an accessible and up-to-date senior center for our community elders continues to be deprioritized. Being an inclusive city means respecting and caring for our community's elders. Norman Citizens for Racial Justice joins the many other voices in our community in calling on the City of Norman to prioritize development of the new senior center as a demonstration of the city's commitment to building an inclusive community. In addition to prioritizing a new senior center, we seek creation of a People's History Museum of Norman. And this could be established perhaps in the old senior center once the new senior center is built. In this way, we could honor both the history of the city of Norman while honoring and caring for our elders. We have 3 questions. The first, as mayor, what will you do to support an initiative for a People's History Museum? What are some other ways you will work to ensure the city of Norman acknowledges its racist history? And third, how will you ensure that Norman's elderly are not considered, how will you ensure that Norman's elderly are considered and represented in community discussions? And Bria, you're first.
My question would be, am I answering all 3 in 2 minutes? Because that's going to be difficult.
Should we give them 3, 4?
Or are we going to do one?
One question at a time?
Okay.
Okay.
So what will I do to support an initiative for a People's History Museum? I do love the historic nature in general of our current senior center, but my concern is it's not accessible now. I think we need to be mindful of that and thinking if we want an inclusive place where everyone can come, maybe that's not the best answer, or find ways to make it more accessible. I would fully support this. You know, we have the Cleveland County Museum, but that reflects the history of that one time only and certain families that were rich enough to have homes like that. So that's not truly an inclusive history of Norman by any means. So I would definitely support this. I think it could be a project that we could get buy-in from a lot of people. You know, the community gathering place that they have in Tulsa, I don't know if we're going to have a big park like that in the near future, but we can still have a place like that, and that could very much be this. We have a lot of history that I think is not displayed because we don't have an appropriate place for it. Well, this would be an appropriate place for it. Like, where are those DeBar signs? I'd like to see those. I think a lot of people would, because that would be a great reminder, not only of who we were, but what we went through to get that changed, and the progress that we have made. And I think we were all, I'm guessing most of us were there that night, the progress we still need to make. So I would combine community partners. Fundraising is key, and I think that we could work with that. And I think there's a lot of opportunities with OU being in Norman, and that's a historical moment for them as well, and putting that together and curating it. Because when I was doing research for DeBar, highlighting our history and reading it from the dais, most of the research I found was compiled by people at the University of Oklahoma. So we should definitely partner with them, not only in curating it, but we need to reach out to all of these marginalized groups again, the churches and the certain neighborhoods, and make sure that they're involved as well.
Thank you.
I love this question. I'm 100% all in for making the old senior center the People's Museum. In fact, back when the DeBar discussion debate was going on, I had conversations then with people about it, because I also had conversations with the folks at the Moore Lindsay House, who was initially proposed as being the site where the DeBar street signs could go and other historical artifacts. And I was under the understanding from those conversations that that was not likely to happen. So I immediately went to problem solving, plan B, and knew that we were going to be building a senior center, and hopefully we will get that issue resolved very quickly, and that would be freeing up that museum. And I'd always, in my mind, when people had asked me about what that could be used for, have said to people that I could see it potentially being a People's History Museum, and I think that would be a great idea. Of course, there will need to be some updates and refurbishment to the facility, but it's certainly a place that would be a great place to have it right near June Benson Park, and would be a great place for people to be able to get to here in central Norman. I also fully support it, and I'm hopeful that we can get council support and funding for, I think, what was been referred to as a Unity Park there on what was DeBar Avenue, a place potentially where people could gather like they have in Reconciliation Park in Tulsa, where events could be held and people could gather, have a safe space, if you will, to share ideas, to engage in these kinds of tough conversations, and a place to recognize and to remember the awful, awful history that Norman has and its underbelly of being a racist sundown community. Because if we forget our history, we will repeat it. And unfortunately, we are seeing some of those things even this week happening, and so we must always keep that history at our forefront so we remember it and we don't let it happen again.
Thank you. Evan?
Don't let it happen again. Amen. One thing about, I'm sorry, does someone have something to say? Okay, it was outside. I think that humanity has this proclivity for finding reasons to distance oneself from the other. You look in our tribal history, the Tutsis and the Hutu were more than willing to go into the most savage aspects of animal flight or fight responses. The tribes of Europe fought for thousands of years, and all of them were using in some way ideas or myth about how they came into their sovereignty to justify that type of confrontation. So, again, coming back to what I said earlier about converting people to this realization that racism is a part of our society, it's been a part of the human experience. The People's Museum is a great idea. I'd like to bring it in with the Botanical Gardens, Oil, Petroleum History Museum, Weather Museum. I think there's an opportunity for dispersing them throughout the community, for getting people awakened to that transcendent connection. And when we can do that, it makes people want to be more engaged.
Okay, next round with the second question. If you need me to repeat it, I will. Some other ways you will work to ensure the city of Norman acknowledges its racist history.
Are we rotating or are we just back to me?
I think we're going to consider
back
this
to
the
me.
same set.
Oh,
See, I thought the same
I
thing.
thought it was going to me.
So some ways that we will work to ensure the city of Norman acknowledges racist history. When we were going through the DeBar Avenue trial journey, a lot of people suggested, well, just put up one of those plaques, like they have on the OU campus that shares its history. Except I work at the OU campus, and there's actually a plaque in front of the chemistry building, one of the few buildings on campus that's not named after someone, because it was named after someone. It was named after Edwin DeBar. So when they removed it, they didn't rename it, and there's a big old plaque in front of it that actually has that history, and ask a student what that plaque says and nobody knows. So that is definitely not the way to go about sharing that. In the pledge, it mentioned working with Norman Public Schools. We've made a lot of progress in our schools. They don't have the land run celebrations anymore that they used to have, but there's a long way to go in our schools. And I think partnering with them to have an inclusivity lesson. We have diversity training at OU, and I don't know how successful that's been, but something like that in schools. We talk about bullying all the time. Bullying comes from ignorance, and so I think there's an excellent opportunity to partner and share not just the history, but our history, and to show how far we've come so these kids at an early age can be proud of being inclusive. I think that's a wonderful way to get them involved and share our history. There are other ways. We have the proclamations, which I think are really, really important. The first stand that I took on the dais was actually right after I got sworn in with LGBTQ History Month. And so some people, and I actually had a comment on a video I shared recently, so glad that the city's recognizing all of these months and not focusing on things like streets and education. And I told him, luckily, we have the bandwidth to do both in the city of Norman. And in the first Beloved Community event, finish the sentence, we actually asked the panel, do these proclamations and resolutions matter? And the answer was yes.
Something. Every little bit helps.
Well, I think the first step is the word that's in the question is to acknowledge it. We have to admit it. We have a racist history. We took lands from natives. We have to say it, acknowledge it, reflect it, understand it. It's what happened. So we have to listen to one another and engage in conversations about it, and then take action, forward momentum and action to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And that's what I would do if I was mayor. I think it's important that we have to acknowledge and understand what we have done in the past. And one of the first steps that I think is really critical, being a Native American myself, is I 100% support and agree that we should recognize as a city the tribal sovereignty of the Absentee Shawnee tribe. A good chunk of the city of Norman sits on their land, and it's their land, and we put our jurisdiction over the top of it. And part of, to me, one of the most direct things that we could do as a city to acknowledge our racist history is to deal honestly and directly with the Native Americans, the Absentee Shawnee tribe, and their sovereignty. As a member of the Cherokee Nation myself, that is very important to me, that tribal sovereignty, and I would 100% ensure that if I'm the mayor of this town, that we will recognize the tribal sovereignty, and we will work with them as equals in governance of the lands that are within the city of Norman and that are also within their lands. Thank you.
A lot of these questions seem to ascribe immense powers to the mayor. And I suppose the mayor shows up at events, right? They do ribbon cuttings. Do we put 2 minutes in to talk about being nice to each other, irrespective of how much melanin you have in your skin? All history is going to be racist. We can't deny it. We can't try to hide from it. We have to engage with it and understand those who we look back on and say we're bad, those that we look back on and say we're good, they were all just products of their environments. If you want to really challenge people to rise above and to transcend their racist, prejudicial proclivities, you're going to have to recognize that some members of the community, they have to be let off the hook for being the descendants of those who were victims or those who were heroes, and you have to then find some way to equalize people. And when that occurs, you can you can start to move beyond it, and you can start to replicate and scale up that knowledge of the process to transcend, to embrace it all, good or bad, and recognize that everything in the history of the universe has brought us here. It's not that hard. Just give me in a gymnasium with a whole bunch of young people.
Thank you.
I swear I could convert them.
So we're moving to the third part of the set. How will you ensure that Norman's elderly are considered and represented in community decisions? Bria?
We've actually had a fair amount of conversations about this because we have made progress on the senior center. And so my concern is let's make sure we don't repeat the mistake that we made with the animal welfare shelter, where we have a lovely new facility and not enough staff or funding. So we've learned from that, and I want to make sure that happens. But then it comes down to programming and things like that. And so I think our boards and commissions should be overhauled, not only in how we announce what vacancies we have and how to apply, and reaching out to specific communities we want represented, but I think the boards and commissions themselves. And so with the priority we're finally placing on our elders, I would love to see a board on senior wellness. And so to talk about different events we could have in Norman, to talk about programming at the senior center. And there's been a lot of talk about Councilmember Bierman's idea, the generational square, because the senior center where we're hoping to put it, will be next to the gym and the aquatic center, so there'll be a lot of cross-generational activity. There's a lot of cross-cultural opportunity there as well, because I have no doubt that an elder from a Native American community has different traditions than my grandparents, perhaps. And I know I would enjoy the opportunity to see what some of those cultures look like in a safe community place. And so that way we could all, again, not only share generational diversity, but cultural diversity at the same time. So I would reach out through, again, a senior wellness committee. Some of our committees only meet quarterly, like the Human Rights Commission, where there's enough work where they could meet monthly. So that is something I would look at. But I would do the committee as well, make sure that there's a lot of cultures as well as different backgrounds, socioeconomics. We want to make sure this amazing senior center is affordable. I don't want anyone being turned away if we have to have any sort of membership fee to make sure we have great programming. So I've looked at what other senior centers have done, and sliding scales would be important. But I think the Senior Wellness Committee will be very, very helpful, as well as programming at the new senior center.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Help.
Well, one of the conversations I've had with folks as I've talked to many of the seniors in our community is that we have a full-time position at City Hall that represents and speaks for the seniors and maybe other groups as well, including potentially some of our marginalized communities or our veterans, so that we have a full-time staff person who is a voice for them inside City Hall, as well as potentially we already have an ad hoc senior committee that's going to be involved in the design of the senior center and implementation of the programming for the senior center, which I fully support that program and fully support that committee. We could take that committee and turn it into more of an ad hoc committee, as Councilmember Clark mentioned, to on an ongoing basis and a more permanent fashion. But I'm a full 100% supporter of the senior center. Have been a very active supporter since the first time I was sworn in on council in September 2016. And in fact, I'll never forget, it was August 2017 at our council retreat that Councilmember Bierman, Wilson, and I discussed with our fellow council members the idea of Generation Square and putting the 3 Norman Ford projects together. And ironically, that same council meeting or that same retreat, other council members presented other ideas that ended up not working out or ended up being overruled. And I'm so thankful and happy to see that eventually the idea of Wilson, Bierman, and myself of a Generation Square of all 3 Norman Ford projects coming together at that North Base location is going to hopefully become a reality here very soon. Hopefully OU will approve that land purchase next week. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Evan?
Well, I think that the city's senior citizens represent 60, 75% of the voting registered residents. I look out at the audience here and it's dominated by older, wizened members of our community. I want them to recruit their grandkids. I want you to take on and use your ability and your power in your matriarchal, patriarchal position within your family to bring more than just yourselves to the polls, to bring more than just your generation to these events, to convey and to convince the importance of these issues. I don't want you to be mad at me, but these issues are so important that we have to go from our own position, acknowledge its authenticity, and then use that passion to engage and to conscript and to draft other people to our cause. I have never been in favor of a singular senior center, nor have I been in favor of an aquatics park. They should be attached to schools. That's how we can get intergenerational interaction. When you have a hydrotherapy pool, whenever you have companion planted gardening and spaces for enrichment near fire departments, near libraries, we need to have at least 2, but they can come together and we can get all of those dynamics to be synergistic if we work together a little bit more.
Thank you. For this next question, the topic is equity. The systematic denial of social, economic, and political resources to Black, Native, and other minority populations throughout history has created a variety of barriers for those populations. Barriers to access and equity also exist for people who are chronically ill, disabled, or struggling with mental health issues. Discrimination on the basis of any of these identities or conditions, or on the basis of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and so forth, can negatively impact both the safety and economic security of individuals. We know that building an inclusive community requires an intersectional lens. For Norman to become an inclusive community, we need to achieve equitable representation of the many identities of our community in public contexts, such as municipal government and in schools, for example, K-12 history courses. We need better access to affordable housing, living wages for the people in the city of Norman and in Oklahoma generally, and we need accessible city government that prioritizes equity. The question is, as mayor, how will you increase and ensure equity in the city of Norman? And we'll start with Bill.
I have to apologize in advance. I've not been feeling terribly well, and I've got a little bit of a bloody nose deal going on right now. I'm hoping I can keep it at bay, but if I have to jump up and run out, it might be because you see blood coming down my face.
And if you start bleeding, like wave or something.
And it's not because I'm a merciless Indian savage, but we'll get to that later maybe in the conversation. Okay, equity. How will you increase and ensure equity in the city of Norman? Well, I think we have to come at it from the mayor from a holistic approach. We have to look at it from social, economic, and environmental perspective. And we have to ensure that in all of those various areas that we are being equitable and how we are treating all of our people. We have to have social policies that are inclusive, that respect every person, regardless of their race, religion, sexual orientation, whatever it might be. And from an economic standpoint, we have to ensure that we're not picking winners and losers. We're not supporting, subsidizing a $100 million arena in Northwest Norman. That rather, we are supporting local minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. I was a government contracting officer in a prior life, and one of the things I've talked about as part of my small business platform, if you will, is doing things that actually ensure that the city of Norman, our taxpayer dollars that you're paying for, are going to support our local businesses, and figuring out ways like we did at the federal level to ensure that minority-owned and veteran-owned and women-owned businesses are given some sort of a preference to have an opportunity to compete for those jobs or those dollars against big companies from out of town that are taking the money out of state and out of the city. So there are things and policies that we can do. We have to roll up our sleeves and get to work and create ideas and think outside the box of things that this city has not done before. But there are things that can be done to address things like economic justice to ensure everyone has an opportunity. And from an environmental standpoint, we absolutely have to be thoughtful about what we are doing. Can't have any kind of regressive taxation. We have to ensure that anything that we are doing, that we are addressing it in a way that does not cause undue harm to marginalized communities and where they live. And you can look at cities across the country where how they have been developed. The poor parts of town are where the sewage plants are, where the trash dumps are, and you can see it's a historical part of the white racism or the white privilege of how cities have been designed and built, and we've seen that happen from time to time. It should not happen here in Norman.
Thank you.
Yeah, when I hear white racism and white privilege, I understand what is meant. I think, as mayor, all the mayor can really do is quarterback something and put the visions forth and try to get council to agree on things and to make proclamations. I've had this thought recently. The city, as a corporation, can inject itself into the market. And the environmental inequality is a response of historical lack of opportunities derived from uneducated, oversimplified human animals trying to solve temporary, short-term problems that also operated within an economic context in which the least desirable property was purchased by those who were climbing the rungs of economic success. Not just black, not just native, not just German, anyone and everyone who came through that had to deal with that aspect. What if the city built a big dormitory and it had a commercial kitchen, so you had the efficiency of home living quarters, shared child care, shared cooking responsibilities, and it was surrounded by, maybe even in a park. You try to help people be more efficient together, and when that occurs, there's strength in numbers, there's solidarity, there's a sense of common purpose and a common culture, a common cause that's being shared. And I suppose all the mayor can do is try to quarterback that and to put forth the ideas and get feedback. So I hope that's enough. Let's keep doing more.
Ready? Yeah. I love your enthusiasm, Evan. I do.
No shortage of that.
So how would I increase and ensure equity? The obvious way is policies. I commend Councilmember Hickman as chair of the Community Planning and Transportation Committee to look at affordable housing in our community. And there were several things that staff recommended that we could do right now that won't cost us anything. Right now. And that's just one way with equity. We also learned that they do workshops and outreach to our residents in Section 8 housing on how to report things and how to take care of or take advantage of different benefits. I want to see more of those. I want to make sure that the services that we do have, people know about and that we're reaching everybody. Because the first ones to disconnect are the ones that don't feel involved, that don't feel respected. And we can do better with that. And that's just, again, personal relationships. That doesn't cost a thing to build those relationships to make people feel valued. Another sign of respect and equity is building more city resources in East Norman, like an East Branch Library. That was, I think, a big sign of equity between West and East Norman. And we can continue that. We need to make sure as we re-envision what our public transportation will look like, that it gets people to their jobs and it gets people to their medical care, and again, an equitable way. And we need hands-on leadership. I've donated my city council salary for the first term, the entire thing, back to programs that benefit Norman Public Schools children. And one of them was the school with the highest overdrawn lunch balances. And I didn't just give them a check, got my food handler's card, and I was lunch lady for a day. It was awesome. I visited Police Activity League that has a lot of at-risk children in this program to build relationships with our police department and ask them if it works, and it does. I went to Baby Steps for our teen moms and to tell them it's okay. You know, you're going to be a great mom. Take advantage of these resources. That is what a mayor needs to do to ensure and increase equity in our community.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. The next issue is homelessness. Although individuals and community groups, for example, Food and Shelter for Friends, Food and Shelter Inc., work hard to address the needs of individuals and families without adequate food and housing, chronic homelessness and food insecurity continue to be serious concerns for Norman. Factors that contribute to homelessness include lack of resources for those with chronic disabilities, mental illness, and physical health issues, lack of affordable housing, lack of rehabilitation programs for the formerly incarcerated, among other reasons. Given our local challenges related to homelessness, the decision by the City of Norman to lock park bathrooms during the winter seems especially cruel and inconsistent with our mission of building an inclusive community. As mayor, how will you work to address chronic homelessness and related issues for the City of Norman? And we're starting with Evan.
Well, I seem to have kind of jumped the gun a little bit in bringing up this idea about, you know, decentralized, city-operated, family dormitory, kitchen installations. Why are people chronically homeless? Is it addiction? Is it trauma from parenting that was itself dysfunctional because their parents were raised in a traumatic, dysfunctional home full of abuse and we're surrounded by traps. This culture is full of traps. If it's not food, it's drugs. If it's not drugs, it's a casino. If it's not a casino, it's spectacle. If it's not spectacle, it's gossip, and it's the news about Trump and Pelosi and Schumer and McConnell. And there's something at the root of this culture and its decadence and the way in which we are all in a position to either validate or castigate and incentivize or disincentivize what we think brings about a healthier, more moral, more connected, more creative culture that's collaborative. I think I understand what to do, but as mayor, it's not going to be enough. I think I'm going to have to run against Jim Inhofe in 2020 and get a larger platform to influence some of these large macro cultural issues that I see. So I'll do my best. That's what I'll do to help fix it. But I really don't even want you to vote for me. Just give me money. Just give me money and
You heard it here
fill up my
first.
coffers for the next race.
Thank you.
I need
it. Bria.
Okay. He's right, though, when it comes to where we get the majority of our resources. We have a state government that refuses to take assistance from our federal government, so it puts the burden on local governments to fulfill the issues and handle a lot of these problems. Now, we have done an outstanding job of, I think, handling homelessness, but we're a long way from ending it. We were one of the first communities in Oklahoma, if not the first, to reach functional zero with our veteran homelessness, but that's not going to be enough. Yeah, it is something to celebrate.
That is.
What I would like to see in the related issues, this will focus on that part, is a special training with the Norman Police Department. And I know they get a lot of training on mental health issues, but I'd like to make sure that they know what our homeless resources are. For example, Oklahoma City has a HOT team. Homelessness outreach team is what it is, on their police department. And why don't we have that here? I feel like that's another thing that we could do that doesn't cost a thing. Specialized training, a team that reaches out there and puts people in connection with the resources that they need. And as much as we need to continue our support of the nonprofits that work with this, the Salvation Army, I mean, even our OK Adapt, they make sure there's housing for our residents with disabilities, food and shelter, obviously. We need to protect in our budget the small amount that we do have allotted for social services. When we did the budget last time, there was actually talk about cutting that. And to get phone calls from the executive director of organizations like CCFI, who works with the Boys and Girls Club, that was incredibly stressful. I mean, I know budgeting is hard, and we want a lot of these awesome staff positions, but we can't even afford that, so we need to make sure we protect the funding that we do have, because until we get people like Evan in the office in the federal government, I don't think we're going to get help that we need from that level.
Excellent question. And to me, it's kind of a two-step process. The first step is we have to take care of the people that are homeless right now. And I represent currently Ward 4, which is Central Norman, for those of you who don't know. And we have, that's where a large percentage of the homeless and mental health and disability folks live, and where those challenges exist. I will tell you that it's not uncommon. My office is on Main Street, corner of Main and University, and I have odd hours. Those of you that follow me on social media see recently I was at my office at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning until sunrise. It wasn't this particular morning, but oftentimes it's not uncommon for me to pull up to my office, which has a little inset alcove, and for there to be a homeless person in that little alcove because it gets him out of the wind or her out of the wind. And so it's a very personal and sad and frustrating thing to see in our town. And how do we deal with it? I've worked a lot with Lieutenant Bryant. He's on our police department. They have wonderful resources. They're very well trained in this area, and he does a great job in tackling these challenges. Part of what he does and part of what I've learned from him and collaborated with him and what we need to do as a community is bring together the resources that we have in this town. And we have a lot of great nonprofits and resources in Norman that we can bring together to help our existing homeless population. I'll never forget the time when I was with Lieutenant Bryant at June Benson Park when he showed me, we went through the process of dressing a person who had homelessness and interviewing him and getting him the services that he needed on one of the national nights out. But we have to go beyond that. The second step is looking at why are they homeless? Do they need a job? Helping to bring quality jobs to this town so that people can be employed and have earn a living wage and have benefits. They're associated with this also their environmental impacts. We're dealing with this issue right now on Bishop Creek, where we have a homeless population upstream that's resulting in quite a bit of impact potentially on the stormwater issues in the creek. So it's a holistic solution again, and going to take multiple steps and people working together.
Thank you.
I had this thought while Bill was speaking. What if we trained people to not just when you see somebody like that, give them a dollar?
We need to move on.
I hear you. Go ahead. But to cry while we do it.
I'm going to ask a question first, and then you can
go for it. Go for it.
After Bria and Bill. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. The fifth subtopic is police brutality and community policing. Following the January 2017 wrongful death of Marconia Kessie, a 34-year-old black man struggling with homelessness and mental illness, residents of Norman expressed anger and disgust. Body cam footage showed two Norman police officers, Kyle Kanan and Daniel Brown, mocking and laughing as they dragged Kessie across the parking lot of Norman Regional Hospital, where he had sought but been released from medical attention. In the months that followed, discussions of police brutality and related issues increased broadly, with many people calling for community policing. We understand community policing as being police officers representing the communities they serve, being present, approachable, and active in the community in a friendly, non-aggressive manner, as well as having community participation in the ways the community is policed. Two questions for this. The first is, as mayor, how will you work to address issues related to police brutality in the city of Norman?
Is it my turn? Okay. I think this is a very real issue. There are a lot of race issues that I think people would like to think are still in the past, and we won't deal with that again, like what's happening on the OU campus. And that is a nice reminder that that is not the case, and we can't be blinded to that and that give ourselves that false sense of security. And something that I've been happy with, and that example that you gave us was an excellent use of the new body cams. I think it allows a level of transparency that we deserve, and hopefully we'll keep police remembering that they are being watched. But we shouldn't have to remind them that they're being watched. We should train them and make sure that they know how to handle these situations. But it comes more than training. We need to have a diverse police force. I think a lot of people don't understand what it's like to be in the shoes of another person until they really connect with them. And I think the more that we encourage diversity and build that brotherhood and sisterhood within a police force based on respect and understanding, I think that's where we're going to see real cultural change, is within the organization. It can't be just training. I mean, we are who we are. Like implicit bias tests, that's great. You learn what your implicit biases are, but they're really hard to change, even if you identify them. So it's got to go deeper than that. So I think we need to focus on our recruitment, and we need to expand programs like Police Activities League and Citizens Police Academy and things like that, so we can build relationships not only within the police force, but with the police force and the community. And we need to take a strong stance when it does happen, because we've seen that it will happen in Norman. And we need to involve the community in how we address it and restore that trust and maintain that transparency. but we need to make sure we're sending messages that that is not what we do in the city of Norman.
Thank you.
I do believe that issues like this do affect and go directly to the public trust in our community and in our officers. And the conduct of those officers was not acceptable. I actually had several conversations with Mr. Kesey's, I believe it was his uncle. He came to my law office, which, you know, I always tell people I have an open door policy, and my door is right on Main Street, and you can look in the windows and see me literally sitting in my office. So it's not any much more open than it's possible about what happened and how tragic it was, and try to point him in the right direction. And I see that they have actually filed a lawsuit against the city of Norman here just in the last days. And I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be, but it was a very sad and tragic thing. And unfortunately, sometimes awful events like that are what get the community to pay attention and to be aware and to challenge the institutions sometimes that people don't want to stand up to. And we also have to be willing to hold people accountable. And those are tough things to say, because, you know, some people don't want to do that and you know, like the status quo. But those folks that have followed me since the time I've been on council, I have been willing to stand up and challenge people and to push back and to hold people accountable. And part of what makes me say that is you can go back and look in the fall of 2016 when we were discussing the police body cams. I believe at the time it was Councilmember Carswell and myself who stood up and asked tough questions. And at that time, we actually asked for a citizen oversight committee for the department as a part of that discussion about the body cams, and were soundly not supported, is how I will put it. And so I'm happy to see that things are moving forward in the positive direction with the police oversight committee and discussions that have been happening. But it's tragic and unfortunate that it took the life of someone for some of these conversations to come back around. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, amen. Oh, wow. Brutality. Callousness. Sadistic perception of other people's positions and the power that you hold over them must be neurologically and physiologically an incredible rush, because it has animated history, it has animated our species. Ever since we broke out of the tribes, after we left a tribal life and the balance of powers was no longer maintained by tribal skirmishes, that tendency has arisen repeatedly with each new generation. That idea that I put forth a minute ago about when police are showing up on a scene and say there's a fight and you've got two good cops who are, who are dispersing the situation, but then you've got a couple other cops who are just crying, who are on the side because you're hurting yourselves, you're hurting everyone, you're making this community less efficient and less effective. Why are you doing this to yourself? Now, it seems silly. Do we have police officers take acting classes? I don't know. It's an absurd idea. But sometimes absurd ideas can be solutions to problems that seem incontrovertible and seem as though they'll never be solved. I wish we could just all better understand where we came from and how our minds work.
Thank you. The second question for this set, going back to Bria, how will you work to increase and promote community policing in the city of Norman?
I think we need more police out in the community. I think we need to have, I think we're kind of limited with our community policing opportunities because they still have their regular parts of patrolling and all those things that they do. If we had more staff, we could do more community policing activities and again build those relationships. But if building the staff is the answer, or even just as we add it normally, diversity has got to be there. I want to see someone who looks like me out there. That's how people feel safe. That's how they connect. And so we've got to diversify our police force, and I know that's a priority of the chief. I know that the police department already takes a massive chunk of our general fund. These programs cost money. And I know that some of our council members don't agree with using seizure funds, and there are certain times you can and cannot use them. But if we can connect them to community-oriented policing, I would support that. I would like to see they have a multifamily housing program that helps reduce crime, but the neighborhoods that need it could possibly be the Section 8 housing and affordable housing like that. I'd love to see where we could make that free, so those police would have the opportunity to build those relationships with the residents and make their homes safer. Another thing I'm very much invested in, should I be lucky enough to become mayor, is bringing the Neighborhood Alliance program to the city of Norman. It has done wonderful things in Oklahoma City, and there's no reason that we can't replicate it here. I think our National Night Out events have a nice database of neighborhoods to start with, and it's a great tool with not only communication between city and residents, but again, building relationships. I also think that the School Resource Officer program, some people aren't for it, but we have it. It's been voted on. I think we can fully fund that. My son is in middle school this year, and the first person he met that made him feel comfortable, because he transferred to a school outside of his district, was the school resource officer. So I know that it has its pros and cons, but I have seen it work. Thank you.
Okay, I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force, and I fully support our men and women in uniform. Having been in the military, I know that it's important that they have our support and the community has their support. I also support community-oriented policing. I think that is the right approach in a town like Norman, where we want to have a relationship, a matter of public trust between the people and our police. But that community-oriented policing needs to be done in a way where people are on the ground. The officers are on the ground. I'm a runner. I always kind of use this analogy. And when you run through a neighborhood, you have a different feel for it than just driving through it.
True.
You feel the ground, you see the people, you say hello, you can pet their dogs. You know, it's like riding a bike or walking on the ground. You get a different feel of a community than when you do just driving through it. Yeah. I think everybody would agree with that. Sure. And so when you're talking about community-oriented policing, our officers need to be on the ground more, walking the beat like the old days, riding bikes through the streets. You know, I always tell people that it's not the same thing going through a neighborhood when you're on a bike or when you're walking than when you're riding through a military vehicle looking out through the turret. And I do not support police militarization in our community.
Amen.
Period.
Amen. We don't need it.
I want our officers to go into those marginalized communities and build relationships, walk into those neighborhoods, not drive into them, but walk into those neighborhoods and make relationships, meet the pastors and meet the leaders, and build those kind of relationships that are going to build that public trust with those communities, because that's the way that we're going to get to a point where we can all work more together and have a bond together. I do also think the School Resource Officer Program is important. It is funded. It was passed by the people. And when I proposed a resolution to change the TIF language for the resolution to end the TIF, I ensured that we added a language in there to fully fund the School Resource Officer Program so that our kids can be safe in school, and we cannot let it become a pipeline to prisons. I do not support that.
Thank you.
Oh, I had a couple thoughts. One, about the school resource officers. I think our school resource officers, they ought to take on the job of teaching self-defense. That's a lot of their trance, a lot of their expertise, and let them be the ones who provide security and empower young people to not be as afraid as they might be, to give them those skills. Let me talk to Chief Humphrey about that. I had this other idea, the community policing. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with having an ice cream man drive through your neighborhood. What if our police officers in their vehicles as they were on their beat in their community, what if they used their low-volume public address system and they broadcast just basic community information, updates? Maybe their council member could do like a little recording, a little 1 minute.
Yeah, I did.
And then, boom, deploy them out into the city, and we get community participation, community informed action, and people know the police officers who work on the force. I don't know. There's a lot to be done, and I think we need it all.
Thank you. The next issue is cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation involves the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, and other elements of one culture by a society or individual members of another culture, typically a more dominant culture, individuals or society. Obvious examples of cultural appropriation include young white female pop stars wearing native headdresses on stage.
I remember that.
Another obvious example is blackface, used for supposedly humorous purposes. In all of these, there's a very obvious power dynamic between the dominant culture appropriating an element of a culture, taking it out of its contextual, historical context, and using it inappropriately without recognition or honoring the original status or space of the element. There are also less obvious examples of cultural appropriation. We could easily make a case that just speaking humorously about the city of Norman as Nompton is a form of cultural appropriation. And some examples of cultural appropriation are a little more murky or confusing because they can either be extreme or perhaps not as extreme depending on the particular context. For example, many businesses benefit from the appropriation and exploitation of Native American cultures. Native art, tribal prints, regalia, and more are often sold without the consent of or benefit to the cultures and tribes of origin, and they are sold in contextless ways as a piece of fashion, as opposed to being grounded in the traditional historical context. Meanwhile, in our same city where this does happen in local businesses, Native artists and Native-owned businesses struggle to maintain economic security. For Norman to become an inclusive community, public awareness and discouragement of cultural appropriation should be increased. The questions are, as mayor, what will you do to discourage cultural appropriation? And please pause when I ask this because I do have an announcement to give. And the second one that we'll do as a second round is, what will you do to encourage and support culturally appropriate business practices? We're going to take a moment and I'm going to ask the audience if any of you had questions that you wanted us to consider asking. Where's Jeff? Yes. Look at Jeff in the pink. If you have a question that you want to be considered to be asked, make sure he has that question in his hand by the time we finish this round.
Please throw some more questions at us.
And I believe we're starting with Bill on this one.
And I apologize. Were those going to appear on the screen? Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I said this already. I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation, and so cultural appropriation is something that is completely unacceptable. When you were given examples, the one that came to my mind actually first was the video of the Halloween costumes of the girls dressing up like Pocahontas, which was another example, I guess, compared like the other ones that you mentioned. And I know I have two young daughters that I consider my social justice warriors, and one of them, my daughter Emma, is here tonight. And I have ensured that they know that that kind of behavior, cultural appropriation, is completely inappropriate. And so as mayor, I think that it's important that what we have to do is we have to listen to the leaders in our marginalized communities and in these in the communities for which cultural appropriation happens sometimes, and take action to ensure that people are made aware of how it's inappropriate, how it's hurtful, and how it's very insensitive to the cultural, historical cultural aspects of these communities that have been marginalized over time. Because really, other than having parents who ensure that their children know that those are not the right things to do, all we can do is try to educate folks. And I will be the first person to admit, that I have white privilege and I have learned things about my own culture, more as an adult than I did as a child. And I've tried very hard to pass that on to my children. And I think, unfortunately, there are many in this state and in this country that have not done that and have not helped to pass things along, but have maybe passed on racial and inappropriate biases from their past. And so that would be the kind of things that I would do, would be to try to listen to people, ensure that we have an action plan that's collaborative and that involves all communities and educates those in our community who do not understand what cultural appropriation is and how inappropriate and insensitive it is.
I lived in China. I lived in the Bahamas. And I've lived here. I don't think any singular culture can discourage itself from being integrated with every other culture. We lived in a globalized world. I took some of Chinese culture with me. Whenever I was in the Bahamas, I took some of former chattel slave descendant culture, and I took some of the Arawak Indian culture. A lot of people don't know that when Columbus arrived, there was all the Bahamian Caribbean islands were populated by people who do not exist anymore. And it had genocide committed against them, primarily because of, as Jared Diamond references in his books, guns, germs, and steel. Human technology, sorry about that. It's one of my buddies.
You look good on TV.
Right on cue.
He was going to video for me tonight. Guns, germs, and steel brought European culture to the world and influenced our biological history and our cultural evolution. And I want people to steal my culture. I want people to take my ideas and to run with them. I want them to appreciate what it is that has made me, because I feel a sense of gratitude and reverence and appreciation for all that came before me coming here. Do I understand when people are offended? Absolutely. However, we have to transcend our offense and our sense of indignation when we know that we are a part of this larger entity. And I don't think we encourage people to do that enough.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's a great question, though.
Go ahead, Bria.
Thank you. So for the obvious, and it's more than inappropriate, it's more than offensive, like the cultural appropriation of blackface that we're dealing with is at OU right now. But I want to clarify, it's not just at OU that's dealing with it. OU is in the city of Norman, so the city of Norman is dealing with that. So that not only needs to be called out, but city leadership must stand up against that. They must make statements. I went to the Rally to End Racism, and I think I surprised a ballroom full of passionate young people when I stood up and said, I am on the Norman City Council, and I asked them if they knew what our motto was, and they were all quite shocked to hear that. And I told them that I am ready to work with the university when that time comes, because we are one community. So the blatant ones need to be called out, and not just from the community, but from our leadership. We have a responsibility to set an example to call that out when we see it. But I also think that on the ones that aren't so obvious, that are accidental even, we need to make an environment in our city where people who are being appropriated feel comfortable enough to make that a teachable moment. I had one of those. I remember she was here earlier. A friend of mine in the first office I worked at, and a bunch of our coworkers were huddled together, and I said, "Oh, are you guys having a powwow?" And she's Native American and turned and looked at me, and I meant no offense by it. I didn't know. I'm not from Oklahoma originally, and I'll tell you what, I will never forget that moment. And I want to create an environment where we can do that with each other, where we can have civil conversations and discourse about what's offensive and what's not. I also think, back to that idea of Norman Public Schools, I think I will title those classes, when I approach Dr. Migliorino, diversity appreciation classes, where maybe kids can understand I may not come from that background, but now I understand it's offensive from a young age, so it starts earlier in our community.
Thank you.
Okay, question number 2. I have a couple ideas and thoughts on this topic. The first one is, as I mentioned before, about preferences from city purchasing. For example, if we have businesses that are engaging in culturally appropriate business practices or that are minority owned, there's nothing against the law where the city could not give them a preference. You know, for example, we get dinner brought to us on council nights. I know that's a small thing, but it's a good example. If there was a culturally appropriate business, we could get our dinners from them to support them. And that's your taxpayer dollars going back to support the person who is running an appropriate, smart, inclusive business. Another idea, my daughter's in school at Columbia University in New York City, and up in the Morningside Heights area, and I love walking in that. It's a very walkable neighborhood. And on businesses, on some of the businesses, they'll have a label, I say, called, and referred to, I believe, as like safe space, safe place. And so we could have something like that in Norman and call it, Inclusive Norman, where as I heard y'all's pledge, and I was over there nodding my head like, yeah, let's do this, I'm down with this. I was thinking to myself, what if we had something like that in Norman, where if you had a business that signed on to your pledge, they would get a label, a sticker, whatever you want to call it, a decal that they could put in their window. Because ultimately the best way to affect business, and to some extent them acting in a more appropriate way and being inclusive, is with their pocketbooks. And putting it on your website or places like that where it said things such as, these are our inclusive partners. But ultimately, one of the things I think we need to do in this city is we need to address the city's non-discrimination policy. And we need to ensure and include things like gender identity and sexual orientation, other aspects that expands the city's non-discrimination policy to ensure that we truly are an inclusive community and we put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and that we are being inclusive in our non-discrimination policy to set it out there for everybody to see.
Thank you.
I'm a little confused as to what culturally appropriate business practices are. Can you go back over that?
I was just wondering whether we should do that, but taking an object that has meaning in connection with other elements of a culture, taking it out of that place and then profiting with it, whether that profiting be financial or entertainment value, quote unquote, or some other means that removes it from its cultural space and benefits there's a power dynamic between the two. So
right.
It's causing harm to the
and
original
it's not being
culture.
Revered.
And it's not being understood or honored by the dominating culture.
How do we imbue our young people and the members of our community with a sense of reverence, an appreciation for the opportunity to be alive, the opportunity to learn and to discover about our history, about different cultures, about the diversity and the multiplicity of myths and ideas that have animated our species to come to this point, to this moment? I don't think that's the mayor's job. I don't think the mayor can do anything to change people's sensibilities in a single policy. I think this is something that we have to do for one another in the way that we create greater interest and collaboration to collectively shift our thinking. And that only happens if we have passion when we're talking about these issues. And if we're getting out there and we're going to the schools, we're going into these communities that aren't engaged with, that are neglected. And I've mentioned before that, I don't really even want to be mayor. If I have the title of mayor, please believe me, I am going into these apartment complex ghettos. I am going into these trailer parks. Please believe me, I have been to those places all around the world. If we're trying to shift people's thinking so that anything, like you mentioned, that ought to be revered and is instead used to be mocked, isn't sold because there's no market for it. And that the entire culture is what determines the market rather than the market determining what our culture is. And that's too much of what we've got.
Thank you.
I like that Evan pointed out the obvious, that mayors, especially in our, I hate the phrase, weak mayor form of government, we don't have as much power as I think the phrase mayor embodies, but we do have the power to set a tone. We have the power to set a tone about what's appropriate, what's welcome, and what's appreciated in our city limits. And that is something that I know I could do. I helped start the Eastside Business Association here in our community because I wanted Eastside businesses to feel a part of all of the things that were happening with downtowners and Camps Corner. And it has been successful. At the community listening session I had last night, I was very pleased to hear that. But I worked with the chamber to talk about, with our lunch and learns, to make sure that the minority-owned and women-owned businesses were aware of the SBA grants and other federal funding and state funding opportunities. So I think when we empower our cultural businesses, I think we'll have the appropriate competition and respect among each other, where hopefully that will help. And I love that we live in a community where if something was culturally inappropriate, they would be called out. I'm quite confident with that, and one of the many reasons why I love living in Norman, Oklahoma. But again, the residents shouldn't have to do all the work with racial justice in Norman. They shouldn't. I'm glad that they do, and I'm glad that they hold elected officials accountable, but the elected officials need to hold themselves accountable, again, in the message that we send. Thank you.
We answered both of those now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. This is the moment. The questions need to be in Jeff's hand. We're down to the last of the pre-programmed questions. The last subject is white supremacy, and specifically complicity in or disruption of white supremacy. The United States, the state of Oklahoma, and the city of Norman all developed in a structural system based on white supremacy that manifests in our legal systems, banking and financial policies and practices, housing and community development, educational systems, and employment practices, among other contexts. Whether or not we as individuals are trying to be anti-racist, those of us who are perceived as white benefit under systems of white supremacy, even when we are ignorant of that fact. Because white supremacy permeates our government's social institutions and public spaces, we are all complicit to some extent in its perpetuation, even if we abhor it. For the city of Norman to meet its stated goal of becoming an inclusive community, we all have responsibility to increase our understanding of how white supremacy operates and whether and how our systems and circumstances might be transformed to be more just and equitable for all. It is especially important for those serving in leadership roles to acknowledge our own ignorance, complicity, and susceptibility to white supremacy, and to strive continuously to dismantle it. We have 2 questions in this set. I'll read them both. What are you doing to increase your understanding of how white supremacy functions and in the ways in which you are personally complicit in it. And the second one will be, as mayor and also as a human being, what will you do to intentionally disrupt white supremacy in all your realms of influence? And we're starting with Evan.
Oh, what a question. What a question. Oh, it seems as if I transcended whiteness and blackness and brownness so long ago that concepts like white supremacy and to see the neo-Nazi white supremacists still ardently protesting, it reveals to me that our culture has failed to impart an understanding about how we got here. Because if you understand that and you appreciate the singular human family and you understand the atomic theory and you understand how the electrons flow through your cell phone, well, you're appreciating things that were based on the discoveries of those white men. If you want to make a claim to white supremacy, there's plenty of inventions and geniuses and discoverers that did amazing things that changed the world. However, it seems that what is more important is our collective discovery of the ways in which we have all arisen from human supremacy. It is human supremacy that has given us the position from which to dominate all other species. And everything that has ever come before has built upon that. I don't think that we live in a society that is, how do you change the words around? The dominant culture is Anglo-American, Western European dominant and designed. The science, all of the majority of theology is rooted in that. To say that it's all based on neo-Nazi principles or has that animus or that intention is simply wrong. And to not recognize every contribution to this human achievement is to diminish the dignity of it.
Sorry to step in. Yeah. So I want to clarify this question. We, as a collective, understand that all white people are complicit in white supremacy. In order for an oppressive system to exist, the people that profit from it do need to be complicit in some way. And in order for us to address it, we need to understand that. So what we want you to consider is how you are all personally, individually, and just you, not as a society, not as a general race, but just you, complicit in white supremacy.
Wow. So the presumption is that by me being viewed by other people as white is complicit in the operation and the maintenance of a system built around the concept of white superiority?
So I think, how about you save that for number 2? Save that for number 2. I'm going to jump in with number 1.
Please
Thanks,
do.
Evan.
Please
okay.
do. Okay.
So in the ways that I am personally complicit in it, so I have always considered myself a person that is open-minded and sympathetic and empathetic, and I've always been a helper. I've been the one to reach across the room to the new kid at school that doesn't have a friend. And so I've never thought of myself as racist by any means, and so many white people say that. I understand that. And it was DeBar Avenue and that experience that made me realize I still have a long way to go, even though I helped lead that. And I think the moment, I'm gonna try not to get emotional, I had gotten some very, very hateful emails from a lot of people. And I remember one night I was feeling really low and upset, and I forwarded it to Dr. Henderson, like whining, like, oh my gosh, they said these mean things to me. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I just whined to Dr. George Henderson about someone being mean to me about racism. Yeah, I know, I like win the trophy on that one of white privilege and rolling around in it. But I needed that moment. And then we all need to have that moment. And DeBar was an opportunity for all of us to have a moment, but some people weren't paying attention. Luckily, I have a feeling we will have lots of opportunities as a community as we move forward for all of us to have that. And back to creating an environment where it's okay, because I immediately and profusely apologized, and he wasn't mad. You've all met Dr. Henderson, I'm guessing. He was incredibly generous and incredibly kind and incredibly understanding, and said, well, I can imagine how hard this is for you. So I know I have a long way to go. I recognize that, and that is the first step. And we need to continue to have conversations as a community, again, in a safe way, in an open way, that encourage learning about each other, but learning about ourselves.
Thank you.
Self-knowledge.
Excellent question. And so let me just jump in by saying, what am I doing to increase my understanding? I'm listening. And I'm learning. And I'm researching. And some of that is from many people in this room, because I know that while I am Native American, I am perceived as white and I'm passing as white, and I come from a privileged place. And what I'm trying to do is to be better and to learn and talk to people. Part of that, for example, is that I grew up in Tulsa, attended first grade through 12th grade in Tulsa public schools, not Tulsa public schools, but schools in Tulsa city limits. Never heard a word about the Tulsa race riots or Black Wall Street. It's amazing to me that I lived 18 years or many years of my life in Tulsa and never learned that. And so I've been going back and reading and researching and learning from people in this room. Same thing with the freedmen. You know, while I'm Cherokee, I didn't know the history of the freedmen, and I fully support their recognition in our tribes. I think it's inappropriate what we are doing. And so trying to learn and to recognize my own shortcomings. And what have I done to be complicit? All the things I just mentioned, but I'm the kind of person that, I'm a problem solver. So when there's an issue or a problem, I usually just want to jump in and try to solve the problem. And one of the things I've learned is that I have to sometimes step back and say, no, Bill, this isn't for you. I have to listen and give space and create safe space for others, especially those from our marginalized communities, to be able to speak and to lead and then to follow and support them and to have their back. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I could give you a specific example, and maybe I'll wait till part two of this question, of something even just today that I dealt with that was very unfortunate.
Okay, I thought about this.
You're on number 2, right?
Yeah. How do we intentionally disrupt white supremacy? Okay, let's substitute white supremacy, and let's just say the dominant culture. The corrosive immorality and the hedonistic vulgarity of the dominant culture right now, at present. Well, I think that comes back to the people within a society, like those who emailed Bree with a hateful, derogatory language, which I would presume were mostly Anglo-Americans. Okay, yeah. How do we provide the opportunity for them to feel dignity, to know their history, to know where they came from, and to appreciate it, to not hide from it? Well, we're going to have to reach out and teach. We're going to have to be so audacious as to say, I'm sorry that you have experienced all of this trauma that has made you a racist, that has made you prejudiced. But I'm going to teach you about why our culture, whether we're talking about the sports and entertainment industry, the music industry, any aspect of our society that has a disequilibrium of representation, and through either aggressive dominance or sexuality or any of the other aspects that affect race and the way in which people communicate and connect, we have to realize that it is those imbalances that justify those racist proclivities that people have for making divisions, binary assessments, black, white, good, bad, and share our knowledge, share our experiences of transcending that and overriding those tendencies that we all have. We have to get out and teach. Every one of you, every one of us is a teacher.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hate it, but I love it.
To intentionally disrupt white supremacy in all of my realms of influence, I think goes back to my answer earlier of how I would deal with cultural appropriation. But I think you also have to understand what your realms of influence are, because I think sometimes people think it's only when you have a title. I want to empower not only myself but my residents to call out racism when they see it everywhere from in their place of work to the bus stop, because we all have a realm of influence. So I think recognizing that, empowering people to speak up, calling it out when we see it is also very, very important. And it also, again, always comes back to education and making sure we reach out to with these boards and commissions to make sure that not only our elected officials but our appointed ones look like our city. And I run a leadership program, and it's got a student organization. I've always been affiliated with student organizations at OU, and we strive for diversity. But I feel like that's almost tokenism. You can't just have diversity for diversity's sake.
Yeah.
And so to make sure that we have the most qualified and educated and experienced people in their own higher up appointed or elected realms of influence, we have to start younger and empower them then. It's not like you matter now because of the color of your skin. You matter because you're a human as a child, and you're going to have the same opportunities as everyone else in Norman. That is how we intentionally disrupt white supremacy, is we give everyone a fair shot from the beginning.
Thank you.
Okay, some of the things that I would do is essentially to challenge the status quo. That's what you have to do. If you want to disrupt white supremacy, you have to be willing to challenge the status quo. And I have done that many times since I've been on council. And part of that would be things like recognizing our Hispanic community. We've not really talked about the Hispanic community very much tonight, but besides the biracial group, they are the largest minority group in Cleveland, in Norman. That's right. And so what? You're welcome. Yes, sir. So what can we do as a city? Why don't we produce literature in Spanish? It's a simple thing. We have a large percentage of Hispanics and Spanish-speaking people in our community. We talked about cultural appropriation. Well, should we support Cinco de Mayo? I don't know. I want to hear what folks from our Hispanic community feel about that. You know, I can go on. You know, I asked the chief years ago, do we track Native women demographics? You know, I support, the missing sister cause, and I understand that, and I've done research about it, and I've talked to my daughters about it to ensure that we in Norman are tracking our Native women as a demographic group separate and apart from other demographic groups, so we can see the crimes that are being committed against Native women. Oh my goodness, the lights are going out. Is my time stopping? Well, here we go. I think somebody leaned on the wall over there.
Let's go.
I thought it was bringing the lights down or something. Anyway, and we have to hold our leaders accountable. If I'm your mayor and I do something stupid, I expect people to come to me and say, "Hey, Bill, now remember when you said that about trying to solve the problem, not listening? That's what you're doing." And I'll be, "Okay, thank you," and have to be willing to understand that. And we have to be willing to recognize that one of the things I've learned from my friends in the disability community is that sometimes when you sit in a chair, you see the world differently. You understand where light switches should be versus when you're standing up and where you think they should be. So you have to be willing to also put yourself in the position of others and be sensitive to that and be respectful.
Jeff, do we have other questions?
You all did a great job putting this on. I can tell there's a lot of thought that went into the questions and the organization of
it was a collective effort, for sure.
Hi, everybody. We just wanted to clarify, someone pointed out that blackface would not be considered cultural appropriation. It is just racist. It's not really like taking a piece of a culture to like benefit from. It comes from minstrel shows, very racist traditions, explicitly to be racist towards black people. So we apologize for using that as the example of cultural appropriation. Thank you.
Good clarification. Good clarification.
And while we're on apologies, it was not our intention to leave out any minorities, and we want to apologize to the Latino population. You know, as minorities, we make mistakes too. Right.
And they need to be addressed. I agree.
About the Latinos and what we're doing. The mothers that can't get their utilities on because they don't speak English. The documents that are only in English. I don't mean to intrude, but.
You're right, sir.
Somebody asked that question. Blackface it shouldn't be there either. But a bunch of Anglo kids running around with sombreros on Cinco de Mayo thinking it's something that comes from Mexico. When I first came here to Oklahoma, that was the first thing that pissed me off when I got on campus. Excuse my language. When I first generation, retired colonel, my father cleaned a lot of toilets so I could be a colonel in the Army. So I take this very, very, very seriously. And I came tonight to see what my mayors were going to do for the community that's near and dear to my heart. Am I light-skinned? Yes, but I'm a mestizo. My family background is rape and pillage. And like my grandmother told me, who has Mayan in her, being from Mexico and being mestizo has nothing to do with your skin color. It's what's in your heart. Wow. And how we treat people is from your heart. That's the native way. So there's an intertwining of cultures. I'm pretty fired up tonight. Really
Go with it, brother. Go with it.
So, absolutely.
Hell, I'm going to run for something now. We watch the news every night. And what's going on with 800,000 people? Not that it's totally tied at the border, but what are we doing? And I'm from Los Angeles. What are we doing in the Midwest for our Hispanic community? I don't see anything.
So
I have no accent. Why? Because I was fortunate enough to be the two younger of four boys. And my two older brothers, life's tough enough. When you live with an accent, you can't survive.
Hey, Colonel.
He has younger ones.
Colonel, I'm going to ask you a question now.
Go ahead.
All right. So,
I have to be reminded to keep quiet sometimes when I get over the wall.
so what would you do as mayor to ensure the Latino community is heard in Norman? And I don't know who we're on now. Bria. Bria, you're starting.
Okay, all right. Outreach is key. I don't think that, I think we've done a poor enough job in reaching out to our Latino community that they don't come to these events. I think that's why it's easy to get one-sided. Colonel Garibay is a longtime friend of mine, and I'm sure he would have ripped me a new one after this if he hadn't done it just now. So there's that, but I appreciate it. And it's outreach. It's not only making sure that our community documents and our websites are bilingual, but with our Citizens Police Academy, I'm in the Community Leadership Development Program with Oklahoma Municipal League, and there are communities in Oklahoma who do an entire Citizens Police Academy in Spanish, a whole academy. And I think that is just the beginning. And we can look to other communities to see what they're doing, because we are lacking in that way in Norman. And I don't know why, but I'll acknowledge it, and I'll work at it. I think we can do better for sure. All I had written down for the question was Latino community, and then she said my name. So outreach, outreach, outreach. And I'll confess to you, Colonel Garibay, I started a Cinco de Mayo because I didn't know better. Man, I'm just like, the skeletons are out tonight. Now you know all of the mistakes that I have made, but I've also shown that I'm willing to learn and grow and do better. And that's what our mayor needs to do, to show that I've made mistakes. It doesn't define who we are. It shows I wasn't perfect in my past, but I've tried to be better in the future. And that's exactly what Norman can do.
And teach that. Amen.
Thank you, Colonel, for your service and for being here tonight from one veteran to another. I really do appreciate your service, and thank you for your comments. And that's why I wanted to work into my last answer there, as I'd been waiting for, not knowing what the questions were going to be, to address our Hispanic population, because like I said, they are our largest minority group. And absolutely, we should have documents and records in Spanish and the ability to have them translated. We should have translators available for folks that need to come to City Hall to have questions and to deal with things like the utility bill. We need to ensure that we have trained and Spanish-speaking people that work the phones in the utility department so they can answer questions and they can address problems. I mean, those seem to me to be fundamental things that we should have in place right now. We need to have officers who can speak Spanish and who can be available to go into the Latino community and to deal with issues and help solve problems, and to do community-oriented policing, walking the beats, going into the Latino communities, going to their churches, going to where they are at, building the relationships. They're not going to come to us. When is the last time you've seen representatives, by and large, from marginalized communities come to City Hall? They don't. Why? Because they don't trust the government and they are too busy working. We have to go to them to build that public trust and go in their language and go in their culture and be sensitive and respectful to both. And if I become the mayor, I will absolutely ensure that we have Spanish-speaking people available at City Hall, that we have Spanish-speaking people available on our police department, and that we treat all of our citizens with respect and treat them and respect their cultures as well.
Yeah, amen. I like this. I thought about this idea. The majority of our Hispanic Latino population, I taught a lot of their kids in the Norman Public Schools, and I've met a number of the parents who are not perfectly fluent. I think we could have some type of a program in which the city has linguists on staff who are training other linguists to go out to a lot of our job sites, a lot of our suburban sprawl development sites, and work with the firms who employ a lot of people, a lot of which are Latino and Hispanic, and set up almost English as a second language classes in between during their lunch hour. Have some type of like a physiology construction technique class that's taught in Spanish too, that also is bilingually taught, so that what is learned in Spanish reinforces the ideas and the linguistic cultural applications for its English analog.
Okay.
The schools are always something that we come back to, but if we can appreciate our history, then that goes a long way.
Okay. All right, thank you. The next question, we'll be starting with Bill. How will you as mayor strengthen Norman's relationship with the absentee Shawnee tribe? And what will you do to ensure they remain a sovereign nation?
Well, if I'm mayor, I'll do everything I can within my power as mayor, which I'm not sure how far that power will go, to ensure that they are recognized for their full tribal sovereignty. Treat them like the sovereign nation that they are, just like the city of Norman is its own sovereign. I think that's the first fundamental step, is to honor and recognize that sovereignty. And then two is to acknowledge and recognize that our lake and many of the lands within the city of Norman are on their property, that we have taken it from them, and to acknowledge what we have done to them in the past, and that we are grateful and thankful for that water now, for our drinking water, but acknowledge that it's come at the cost of their lives and their ancestors. And we have to, I believe those are the first two steps, is to recognize their sovereignty and to essentially acknowledge that we have taken land from them, just like my people, the Cherokee Nation, were a part of the Trail of Tears and were driven across this nation as a part of the relocation acts. And we have to be willing to understand and accept what we have done to the Native people in this country, but in this city, and be willing to acknowledge that and hopefully build relations moving forward from there. I would fully do everything that I could to ensure that we had a strong working relationship with the tribe. Whether that meant having a working group with them or periodic meetings on a regular basis with their tribal leadership, I would fully support that. And like I said, as a Native American myself, I have the tremendous and utmost respect for the work that the absentee tribe has done for their community and what we can do in the city of Norman to help strengthen those efforts and to build a closer and better bond, because I think that would be a wonderful thing for both communities.
Amen. I don't know enough about the jurisdiction and the differential powers that are separated between the two. I had an international law teacher at OU. Her name was Shelley Grunstead, and she did a lot of work for sovereign nation tribes in the state. And she pointed out to me, and she drove this point home throughout the semester, that all Native American tribes in Oklahoma are sovereign nations. So I'm confused as to how the city, as its own incorporated geographical space, can impinge upon the geographic jurisdiction of the absentee Shawnee tribe. But however that works, and I'm sure my legal staff can brief me on how that has come to be, will require harmonization of policies and a vision. And I think the mayor is kind of the quarterback for that vision, but as it is right now, I don't understand enough about those dynamics. Maybe Ashley or somebody else could, elucidate it for me, but I can't answer anything better than that because I don't know any more than that.
Thanks. Yeah.
I could definitely learn more about this as well, Evan. But it's clear that the first thing to do is to recognize it. I'm proud that we were the largest city to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day before Mayor Holt followed our example. So I'm proud of that. And we could be a leader in this area as well. We've talked about the Norman History Museum. It could include the DeBar signs, but it could also include a lovely lesson on that. Most people don't even realize we have a city manager, let alone that we share property with the absentee Shawnee tribes. So there's a lot to be learned in that area. I think there's an opportunity for historical forums. With the month that we recognize for Native American History Month, let's do more with that. Let's get people involved in this history. So it's not just the government and the mayor and the city council recognizing it, but our residents as well. I think there's, again, a lot of cultural opportunities for that. I'd like to see them get involved with our arts council. Let's involve them in many ways, not just in the government part of it. There's a lot of partnership opportunities, but the first step is easily recognition, having those conversations, and making sure that they feel welcome and acknowledged in Norman.
Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you. The next question is, should Norman, this came from two people, should Norman work to become a sanctuary city?
Oh, God, that is an interesting question. We need to think about that. Should we become a sanctuary city? Who benefits? Who's hurt? What unintended consequences can there? Let me say this about the immigration discussion. There's a unique nexus that I think exists between the illicit drug trade coming up out of Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru, the Central American people who are caught in the crossfire of its transportation and the destabilization of their governing systems, the desire for cheap migrant labor. I think for me, the issue is you have to deal with the problem. You have to have a secure, delineated space that defines sovereign nations. we have to recognize that there are certain individuals who, as a result of no choice of their own, are in incredibly needy, desperate conditions and need assistance. However, we also have to contemplate what resources our nation has in dispensing the enlightenment to these individuals who live in Central America and South America that makes their systems fall apart and cause the migration. If it's American demand for the narcotics, then we're a part of that problem. If it's because Catholicism opposes birth control, so we have massive population growth, and we have industrial agriculture providing the food nutrients for that population growth, and that's causing the social strain to bring about the migrations and the caravans. Yeah, well, I'm sorry, a lot of answers don't work for people, and it's, should we become a sanctuary city? Oh, I'm not going to answer it. It's too complicated. It's too complicated for me to put an answer to right now.
Okay.
There's got to be a better solution.
Move on to Bria.
Okay.
Okay, so sanctuary city. I believe it was Councilmember Cardula who actually asked that question when the conversation started coming up. And there are some limitations to formally declaring being a sanctuary city in terms of the federal and the state government. But I also know, I talked to Chief Humphrey about this today, the Xenia Institute, another example, wonderful example of collaboration and inclusivity in our community, will be having a program on this in the near future, and I'm sure you all share about what it means to be a sanctuary city. So we can be a sanctuary city by title, or we can just start being a sanctuary city in practice right now. We can make sure that people feel welcome here. We can make sure that people feel safe here. Now, I know that a lot of that was the DACA and the Dreamers and our residents that come from southern borders, but we also have residents that come from around the world. I do work at the university, and I have worked with students from Syria who are afraid to leave our country right now for any study abroad program because they're afraid they're going to be deported. It's more than I think people realize. But it is something we can start handling now. We don't have to be formally recognized to do what we need to do in a community and to protect people. I've done a good enough job of being an ally, which we should all be doing because it costs nothing to do that, that there was an incident at one of our Mexican restaurants, a beloved one here in Norman, where someone got dragged out and beaten and put into a police car. I don't think it was a Norman police car. I know it wasn't. And they reached out to us, me, and said, what can we do? And I contacted the chief, and he said it wasn't us. But we know these things are happening right here, right now in Norman. And so we can start taking action now and building these coalitions with our sheriff's office, with our police department, with our residents. We can educate people on how to report it. And again, because we do have the university here, we have people from all over the world who are at risk. And we need to, I think, expand our understanding of that as well, and looking on how we become welcoming and hearing everybody's concerns and making sure they're safe in our community.
I don't want to see families in Norman torn apart. I don't want to see people dragged out of their homes or out of cars, never getting to see their children again, simply because of their immigration status, wherever they're from. But especially our Hispanic community, as we have seen happen even just to our neighbor to the north up in Oklahoma City. I have some friends that do some immigration law, and some of the stories I've heard from them in Oklahoma City with ICE doing their thing are awful, horrific. So one simple thing that we could do in Norman is if our officers pull somebody over that happens to be Hispanic and they're inherently biased potential, asking them to check their immigration status for their green card or whatever it might be. We don't have to ask that question. There are some municipalities that's a regular protocol that they do when they pull off, when they have a stop of a vehicle that is somebody who they may have the perception, let's say, that that person is somebody they want to ask for their immigration status records. That's not anything that we need to be asking, in my opinion, as a Norman Police Department. That little things like that, just as an example, that we can begin to develop into our policies and practices that maybe don't get us all the way, because there are some legal limitations to become, and tell you, I don't know what all those are. I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I understand that there are some legal limitations, because we have had this conversation in part as a council to becoming a full sanctuary city, ever how that's defined. But there are things that I think that we can do and we should do as a community to provide as much of a safe space for our citizens, for our residents as possible. And one of those examples, like I said, is the simple thing of when officers pull somebody over, they don't need to be asking questions about their immigration status. We need to make sure that we are treating people with respect, and when we don't need to or have to cooperate with people like ICE, and we're within our legal bounds, then I would support our officers, just like I do support decriminalization of marijuana, that our officers stand up and protect our residents and not allow them to be dragged out of our town.
Thank you. Yes. One more question? I'm going to wrap it up with kind of a softball question then. This came in from one of the people from Facebook, but it's a good way to wrap it up, I think. This person writes, I would be interested to hear each candidate's perspectives on what racial justice issues are in Norman and what areas of concern need special attention. And what does it mean to build an inclusive community? No.
Can we pick one of those three questions, I think?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'll start.
Hold on. I'm sorry.
I think you're
Can you
up.
repeat the question? I'm
So,
sorry.
I would be interested to hear each candidate's perspective on what racial justice issues are in Norman and what areas of concern need special attention. So, special attention, and then what does it mean to build an inclusive community, because that is the mission statement on the city webpage.
If you think that's a softball, I'd love to know what the tough one is. But I have 2 minutes, so I'm just going to dive right in. All of the above. Everything we've talked about tonight is a racial justice issue that we need to start tackling. I mentioned earlier how I had shared a video of some of the human rights issues that I've tackled here in Norman, and somebody commented the whole, well, I'm glad we're focusing on that instead of roads and education. It's got to be right up there with roads and education. It just has to be. And not only because it's the right thing to do, it's quality of life, it's human dignity and respect, it can be an economic piece of our community too. As businesses come to Oklahoma for incentives, and they've got employees that are minorities and women and in the LGBTQ community or from other countries, I want them to pick Norman because it is a welcoming community. It's a safe community. And by God, they sure are trying to build an inclusive community. We have got to be more action than we are words. I have started the Beloved Community Speaker Series where we can have uncomfortable conversations with 4 minority groups in our community and talk about what their experiences are here. Because I can tell you what I think the racial justice issues are, but as a white woman, I'm going to miss a lot of them. I will. I'll admit that. But as mayor, I am here, I am available, and I am listening. And I have shown that I will take action. I have proven to you that this is a priority to me. That building an inclusive community is more than words on a piece of paper or a website. It is how we have to live. It's how we have to create policy. It's how we have to organize our events. It's how we have to reach out to minority communities in our community. It's by action. I've shown that I will do that. I've shown that it's a priority of mine as a council member, and I will sure as hell do it as a mayor.
So the areas of concern are across the board, and we've talked a lot about them tonight. Everything from economic disparities. We've got to have quality jobs so that our people have a chance to have a living wage and benefits to provide for themselves and for their families. We have to address food insecurity, hunger, and homelessness, issues like that. Ensure that we are making it to where all of our residents feel safe in their home, safe in their community, safe in their having food available to them so they can raise their families in a community that is truly inclusive. We have to address housing affordability and accessibility. We have to ensure that we have, as Councilmember Clark mentioned just earlier today, I'm the chair of the Community Planning and Transportation Committee. We started talking about affordable housing, and we identified that we are about, I think, 9,000 rental units short of affordable housing that's needed in this town. So we have a challenge, and I recommended that we create an ad hoc committee, including citizens, to be a part of that discussion, and that was supported by my fellow council members, and I believe the mayor is going to be bringing forward that idea and turning that into real action. And we have to address, the criminal justice system in our town and in our state. Ensure that we are not incarcerating our youth. The idea of prison pipeline to prison, with our schools and things of that sort. I think we also have to address the school curriculum. I've talked to a good friend of mine who's on the Oklahoma City School Board about they need to address and do things to ensure that the school curriculum tells and teaches the right history. So being an inclusive community means that we are respecting everyone in our community, that we are treating everybody with respect, we are listening to everyone, and we are bringing people together to collaborate, to create solutions. I'm a results-oriented person. People who have followed me on council know that I will roll up my sleeves and I will get the job done. And when I tell people that I will follow through on something, I have a track record that proves that I have. Thank you.
There's really not a whole lot that doesn't seem to be a racial or social justice issue. I mean, us showing up here today is an issue for us, the fact that we care about it. Creating an inclusive community. Bria mentioned this. People come here from all over the world. And I wonder, I think, what message are they taking back home? And I look around and I see suburban lawns. I see a university that wants to put out this message of being so lush and beautiful and manicured, when if I were an Iraqi student or if I were someone who was coming up from Mexico, I would not be impressed. I would say, you Americans are decadent and you are wasteful and you don't understand how to revere anything like where I'm from. And this might sound kind of silly and absurd, but if you want to change that message, you pay people to change their homescapes into being tiered, terraced lawns in which you don't waste any water that comes off. You do all your own composting. You grow food. You intersperse it with vegetables and pollinator flowers. You change the culture of the town. And once we all abide by the same regulations and the same incentives, then you send a different message to all of those international students who are going to go back to Saudi Arabia or Estonia, wherever it is from which they hail. They're going to go back and they're going to say, America wasn't what you told me it was. They actually do care, and it's not what we see on TV.
Thank you. There are other questions that we didn't have time for. We'll put them on our site and give the candidates a chance to answer them later.
Yeah.
So first, I don't know if I introduced myself, but my name is Bridget. I'm also a member of Norman Citizens for Racial Justice. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. This is, like I said, this is our first panel, and I feel like we've learned, and hopefully we can all continue to learn together as a community. And we'd like to invite the mayoral candidates to make one final closing statement of 2 minutes, and then we will be done. Thank you.
Okay. Somebody like to go in front of me? So I just went off on my spiel.
Who wants to start?
What order do you want us to go in?
Sorry, guys. We'll start with Evan.
Thank you. Thank you. I was excited to come speak here today. The recent blackface sorority expulsion has prompted a lot of discussion, I think, and it seems like this came up at just the right time. I think a lot of our young people see blackness and whiteness, and they see things to envy, and they see things to aspire towards, and their ability to attain successful integration of that aspiration results in a sense of, okay, I have achieved this level of acceptance or transcendence by this other segment of the social hierarchy. Or, I really tried, but I couldn't. And it manifests in animosity, in the desire and the need to be derisive and pejorative about that other. And I don't think we empathize enough with the young people who are living within this hypersexualized, militarized culture in which, when we look at the bell curves of human development and the ways in which the human identity is formed, and via the balance of masculinity and femininity and all of the adrenal glands and all of the neurochemicals that are all a part of our formation, we fail to recognize just how important that proclivity is for us to oversimplify issues that are too complex into something that is offensive to an extreme degree. And we don't try to understand ourselves and the others. We can do better. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to address these very specific issues that our city and our community as a whole should be addressing. I liked what Ms. Patrone said. We shouldn't have to have just one forum to talk about this. It should be brought up in all of the forums.
Yeah.
But I have a sneaking suspicion it won't be. So that's why I jumped on it so fast, and I apologize for being late. I had a work event this evening. I have shown you what I will do for Norman. It's not a question of my dedication to the issue of inclusivity. I have sacrificed, I've put myself out there, and I will continue to do that. We have passionate citizens in Norman, and it's one of my favorite things about this community. When I screw up, I will hear about it. But we need that in government, in all levels, especially local ones. And our passionate citizens need a passionate mayor that will call an issue out when they see it, not because they get something out of it, or because there's enough pressure from other people or citizen groups, but because it's the right thing to do. That is the kind of mayor that we need in this tough time, because there will be a lot more injustice that we see, not just around the nation, but right here in Norman. And we need someone who will stand up to it, who will set the tone as we build that inclusive community. Racism has no home here in Norman. We're gonna have to work at it, but I think we can do it. But we're gonna have to work at it together. Thank you.
I also want to thank the Norman Citizens for Racial Justice. I'm so happy that you guys had this forum, and just honestly disappointed that we didn't have it in the prior 2 times that I ran for office. This has been a great event and some great questions. And I think the longest forum I've ever participated in, but that's good. It's gone by. It's actually, they say it's like when you're working and you're busy, you don't realize how fast time goes. But I wanted to bring up a point to say racism goes back to our founding documents. One of the things that I've been studying and learning about is how many of you know that in our Declaration of Independence is a line that refers to the merciless Indian savages. Merciless Indian savages in our founding Declaration of Independence document. This town needs a leader that knows how to be collaborative in seeking justice for all of our citizens, that will listen with integrity and to build public trust. That's what we need to address in a real detailed fashion these social and racial justice issues. Is somebody with courage to stand up, who can be collaborative to seek justice solutions, who can bring people together, and who will listen and do it with integrity to build public trust. And I am that kind of a leader. I envision a Norman where every home is healthy, safe, and sustainable. And I think we can achieve that working together. And I'm honored to be endorsed by the Chief Baker, the Chief of the Cherokee Nation, and he knows that I would be the first Native American mayor in the history of the city of Norman if I'm given that opportunity. And so I'm honored to be here tonight, and I kind of want to end, as we're getting to the end of my time here, by recognizing somebody in this audience right now who has been a social justice warrior at the campus, Dr. Suzette Grillette. I see that she's sitting back over here, and I think for the last thing that I want to say is we should give her a round of applause. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. Really do appreciate this opportunity. Have a great night.
It's Grillot.
Grillot, my apologies.
I just wanted to say thank you to the City of Norman for allowing us to host this forum. Thank you to all the candidates who took this seriously and who came here with well-thought answers and who really are working to put this in a meaningful way into their platform. And thank you for all the citizens who took their time out tonight to come here. Thank you.
You saying I didn't take this seriously?
Hi, Evan. You made a point earlier that I think should not and cannot go unaddressed. You mentioned all these scientific discoveries and inventions that white men have made, that you said, it's okay if white supremacists are, proud of that. But I wanted to make a point, especially as an engineer of color, that many of these scientific discoveries and inventions were in fact made by people of color and women of color who did not get the credit for their contributions because history was written by privileged white men.
Major contributions. Hey,